Hey, it's Jordan with TYT Network here in Rhode Island, where tomorrow the state is going to be one of the closest watched states in the primary contest. Rhode Island isn't usually under the microscope for Democratic primaries, but it's close. The last PPP poll I saw has Bernie Sanders up 4 points. Might have been the reason former President Bill Clinton was back today campaigning for Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton has been up in the state until now, so Bernie Sanders is up slightly, 4 points. I came up here because Rhode Island, in terms of voting, has basically cut 66% of its polling stations since the last election. So basically, that's 1 out of 3 polling stations. 1 out of 3 polling stations will be open, and 2 out of 3 have been shut, which in these last few years of voting issues has drawn, eye raises from several people. I'm actually here today with John Marion, who is the executive director of Common Cause Rhode Island. Common Cause is a government watchdog group, holds government accountable in terms of integrity, ethical issues. I'm speaking with John today about those poll closings and other reasons. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the number I have is 66% of the polling stations have been closed?
Yeah, so we went, in the November election, we'll have 419 polls open, and tomorrow we're going to have 144.
And the reason they gave was just basic cost cutting. The numbers that it's going back to are the same as 2008.
So we're actually a little less than 2008, a little more than 2012. But the idea has been that they're trying to they don't anticipate as big a turnout as they do in November, obviously, but that also it's done to save money because the cities and towns pay for part of the cost. They pay for the poll workers and sometimes even to rent the space. And so it was done in the name of saving money.
Mm-hmm. Now, coming from a more cynical mindset, I understand, all right, well, they could rationalize it. This is no more severe or less polling stations than 2008. But since 2008, there's been voter ID laws that have gone into effect, including
here. We're the only state voting tomorrow with a photo ID law. 2 states have non-photo ID laws, I believe.
Right. Obviously, we've seen long lines in Wisconsin, Arizona, New York. I've been reporting on extensively. So I could understand, cutting some polling stations, but the severity that it's like, yes, it worked in 2008, but do you envision issues tomorrow? Because I don't live in Rhode Island, but my assumption is a lot of people either don't know their polling station has changed, or they're going to find out tomorrow and not be able to wait.
Yeah. So the big problems seem to be, from what we're hearing, are that people don't know where it is. So they're assuming it's at their local school. Most of the places that have been cut are in schools. In November, schools are closed. It's actually a state law. And tomorrow, schools aren't closed. So they pulled a lot of polling places out of schools. So people are going to show up at schools looking for their polling place, and it won't be there. That's the one thing. The 2 other things is this is the first presidential cycle with the photo ID law in effect. We had a phased-in law, so in 2012 was non-photo. So a lot of people are, I think, going to be surprised about the photo ID law. And the third thing,
I don't want to interrupt you,
yeah.
But can you explain the photo ID law? Why that's different compared to the other states?
So in I think Connecticut and maybe Maryland, you're asked to show a non-photo ID. In some states, that's a utility bill, pretty wide range of documents. In Rhode Island, tomorrow, voters are going to have to show something with a photo on it. Ours is a more liberal law than the Texases and Wisconsins, where you can't show a student ID, but you can show a gun permit sort of thing. Because you can show a student ID here, and it doesn't even need to be from a state school. It can be from a private school. but you can cast a provisional ballot if you don't show an ID, which in a lot of states you can't. But nonetheless, they're implementing a fairly new law. And the third thing is our delegate selection process is a little complex, and not a lot of people are very familiar with the fact that they're going to, on the Democratic side, have two choices. You're going to choose which candidate you're interested in, and you're going to choose delegates. And on the Republican side, the ballot's actually really confusing because you're choosing candidates, or delegates, excuse me, by congressional district and by statewide. So you actually have three choices on the ballots. So we've been emphasizing as much as we can, social media in particular, find your polling place, look at your ballot because you can see a sample ballot online, and then have your ID. And make sure, if you don't have your ID, that you tell them you have a right to vote a provisional ballot.
Right. And, you know, in New York, they had this ridiculous thing where 6 months before, you had to change party affiliation. Yeah. There was very little effort to inform people of that. Yeah. What has been the Rhode Island state government's communication campaign to make people know, number one, this amount of polling places have closed, and number two, this is where your new polling station would be?
Yeah, so they've relied largely on earned media, which is, you know, we rely on earned media because we're not a rich organization.
So going on TV news and things like that?
Yeah, going on TV news, going on the radio, social media, that sort of thing. There haven't been any paid ads, which I don't know if that happens in other states, but I suspect there's, from what I know about implementation, for instance, in Wisconsin, there was a much bigger price tag to the implementation of that voter ID law. So we haven't seen quite as robust as we'd like. So we've been scrambling as an organization to get the news out as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. And a commenter just said, if there's one issue where the budget shouldn't be a concern, it should be voting. What the hell are our government officials thinking? So what are your thoughts in general? Like I said, they're rationalizing it that the poll closings basically bring it back to 2008 levels, but could this be another Wisconsin in terms of lines?
So I hope not, but I think there are going to be certain spots that we might see some problems tomorrow, particularly groups that have been energized by these particular campaigns on the left and the right. So I'm expecting maybe we're going to see some problems around colleges and universities, particularly Brown University's polling location isn't on campus, unlike Providence College and University of Rhode Island where it is. So Brown students are going to be moving off campus, and that might cause some problems. There are a couple other districts that we saw some problems in the 2012 general election, a couple other polling places, and so we're going to send folks out there to check. We're going to keep reminding people Rhode Island law was actually changed after problems in 2012 to make it very explicit that if you're in line when the polls close at 8 p.m. tomorrow, you have a right to vote, even if the line, they changed the law, even if the line extends outside the building. And we're going to make sure that law is vigorously enforced, because we want everybody in line. Now, shouldn't be a line, right? So the commoner's right. What we've done essentially is we've starved cities and towns of money that they feel the need to close polling locations because they can't afford to pay poll workers for tomorrow. And that's a bigger conversation we're having. Common Cause has been fighting for early voting in this state, and it's an uphill battle. It's amazing the excuses people come up with not to have early voting and to defend these sort of antiquated 19th century traditions of voting on a Tuesday.
Well, let me ask you, I'm not saying there's anything nefarious that has gone on, so I'll preface it with that, but the audience should know the Democratic establishment here and the governor are very strong Hillary Clinton supporters. You keep seeing these coincidences in Arizona, Wisconsin, New York, that a lot of these long lines or accidental purges or what have you seem to be affecting Bernie Sanders, the Bernie Sanders type candidate more. You mentioned lines at colleges, students having to move from Brown University elsewhere. there might not be anything intentional being done to suppress the vote, but do you feel that not enough consideration has been taken into first-time voters, the college voters, or in general voters that might not go toe the establishment line?
So, I think it wasn't intentional, but this decision to consolidate these polls was made a while back before we knew necessarily that Rhode Island would still be in play, both on the Democratic and Republican side. It was very much in play in 2008. Both Obama and Clinton came here, and we broke the record for turnout, about 218,000 ballots cast. But now we have a Republican one on top of it that's very competitive. So I expect we might break that record tomorrow. I don't think, based on my evaluation, so I went and looked, at the 144 polling places, and there aren't patterns in there. Certain neighborhoods weren't targeted necessarily. It was more done literally for every 3 that were in proximity, they just closed 2 of them. You're absolutely right. The Democratic establishment in the state has been behind Hillary Clinton. I think all our superdelegates are pledged to Clinton. But the way elections are structured in this state, our Secretary of State is in charge of a lot of tasks: voter registration, printing the ballot. But there's a separate independent board of elections that is in charge of determining the number of polling places. And that board is the one that did this. There have been some problems at the board that don't have to do with politics. They have to do with administration. So the executive director has actually been suspended.
Right.
He's on suspension right now. And it's his second suspension this year.
Second suspension this year?
Second suspension this year for job performance. And so I think what we're seeing is that this board that's supposed to be overseeing this has taken its eye off the ball.
Yeah, it seemed odd to me just finding out the last day or two that the executive director of the Board of Elections was suspended for, quote, management issues.
Yeah.
Not a lot more details on that because from other people I spoke to, it was more that he wouldn't toe the line for the establishment.
No, it was more, so it's a long, convoluted. There's been a lot written about it locally.
What was his name, just so we have it?
Robert Cando.
Okay.
And this current suspension is because, as part of his previous suspension, he was supposed to take some management classes, and he didn't enroll in the management classes, so they suspended him. There have been some disputes with the role of the board versus the role of the staff. And the board has been more assertive in sort of making sure they're making the decisions, not the staff. And he chafed at that quite a bit. And so it's more, it's been the internal politics of that board that has been a big part of holding him accountable that's been failing here.
Great. And in general, for Rhode Island, we know we've spoken about the polling issue, but does this tend to be more progressive liberal? We know Bernie obviously did very well in New Hampshire. I've heard some parts of Rhode Island lean more, moderate to conservative. So what's the mood in the state now as we head into the primary?
Yeah, so unfortunately, polling is been somewhat sparse here. We're a small state. And the main poll that usually originates in Rhode Island is done by Brown University, and its quality has gone down drastically. So we haven't gotten, they only released it yesterday, so we haven't gotten a good look at what the race looks like. You mentioned PPP came out with one, I think, today. Another one came out today that looked very similar to PPP, and they both look very different from Brown. Rhode Island is a conservative Democratic state, right, in many ways. So the leadership of the legislature is typically been on the conservative ilk in many ways, and we've elected a lot of Republican governors over the years.
The current governor is a Democrat,
Democrat,
but she's actually doing a partnership between Goldman Sachs and small businesses in Rhode Island.
So she is an interesting case because she is socially liberal, but somewhat economically conservative.
Right.
And yeah, you mentioned she's got a background in banking, so that comes up a lot with her.
And I just read one story today that, I don't know if it's just the ideas being floated, but her name being broached as a possible vice president.
Yeah, so they her name comes up a lot for national stuff because she's seen as sort of a rising star within I think parts of her party. And so yeah, I think there have been a couple of things written in the last week talking about her as a possible VP pick or cabinet pick for sure.
You don't have to comment, but a commenter said Gina Raimondo is awful. She's a Hillbot. thought I'd let you know.
So yeah, I mean we're a non-partisan.
Right.
We're not picking sides, Democrat or Republican, or even.
But she's certainly a backer of Hillary Clinton.
So absolutely, and nobody, I don't think she runs away from that at all. So what we've Rhode Island is an interesting state, right? It's the only Democratic state. There's been this rash of voter ID laws that have passed roughly since 2010, and it's the only Democratic state to have done it during that period. And it reflects sort of some of the quirky politics, I think, of this state. And it was largely supported by, I think, all but one member of the legislature who is a racial or ethnic minority. So the politics here can be very weird and unpredictable in some ways.
Got it. And for people watching that are from Rhode Island or have family or friends in Rhode Island, tonight they should be looking online to see where their polling place is?
Yeah, the best place, vote.ri.gov. You put in your name, your birth date, the city you live in, and it pops out your polling place for this election and the next election in September, but also it says view ballot, and you can see your sample ballot. And again, people are really surprised at how people forget, over 4 or 8 years, that you got to select delegates in this deal, and that's important to remember. The other big thing we didn't talk about is Rhode Island's a semi-closed primary, and not unlike New York. So if you're unaffiliated, which the majority of Rhode Islanders who are registered are unaffiliated, you can vote in one of the two primaries.
And unaffiliated is just another. You can be. You're not independent, but it means the same thing.
Yeah, it's synonymous or a synonym for independent.
Right.
But that's what we call it in the state. And so if you're not registered with one of the three parties in the state, we have a third party. You can register tomorrow, essentially by choosing their ballot, vote in that primary, and then immediately when you're done, and a lot of people actually do this in Rhode Island, you disaffiliate. So you fill out a form at the polling place when you're done, and then a couple of weeks after that, you're no longer considered a member of that party.
But your vote still counts.
But your vote still counts, absolutely. And we've seen there was a really hotly contested race where the U.S. Senate was in the balance between Lincoln Chafee and Sheldon Whitehouse, and there were huge numbers of folks who shifted from one party to the other for that race, and in the Republican primary, because there was a conservative challenge to Chafee in the Republican primary back when he was a Republican. So we've seen huge shifts in affiliation, and people take advantage of this ability to do this semi-closed or semi-open, depending your glass half full, glass half empty.
But essentially, it's like a same-day registration.
No, you have to be registered.
Okay.
So you have to be registered. You just don't have to be affiliated with one of the two parties as part of your registration.
Got it.
Yeah, we don't have same-day registration. That's something we'd like to see, except during the general election. So Rhode Island's the only state in the nation in November. Voters can register and vote just for president in November, which is great. Thousands of people take advantage of that in November. We'd like to see true same-day registration where you can vote the whole darn ballot and register on the same day.
Right. Thank you very much for taking the time. And for you guys here, I'll be in Rhode Island tomorrow, and I'll be reporting from some polling stations tomorrow. So stick with youtube.com/TYT Politics, and thanks for watching.